So I just had a few words on racism. And I was kind of curious what y'all thought about racism and like your reasons why you feel like people aren't racist. Because I don't really think a whole lot of people discuss why people are racist. Like that they may encounter in life or something situation that they hear on TV. Because a lot of times the type of racism that gets portrayed on TV is something to where it's like, oh, this person is being hateful. Other types of racism, other than that, it might be, they might let us know about it, but it isn't really made popular. So say for instance, the dude Dylan Roof or whatever his name is, that shut up that church in North Carolina. That's hate, okay, we get it, that's hate. But what about the types of racism that involves like profit? Because I understand that we have racism because of hate, but you have other types of, if somebody looks at something and calls it like institutional racism, like sometimes I think that's fucking stupid. But if I just piggyback on that, and I say like, okay, well, if the institution is racist towards you, why would it be that way? Could it be something to where it's more profitable for them to do what the fuck they doing rather than the shit that you feel like is better for them to do? Because sometimes that could be the case. Back in the day, the reason black people were being lynched, and I guess you could say that lynching is a form of racism. Lynching black people because of messages that were being spread. And these messages, you gotta look at what groups were spreading some of these messages. And so you have these women's Christian temperance movement groups during the time where black people were being lynched that would, I'm going to say this, they were pushing for women's rights and the right for women to vote, but they also were against legalization of alcohol. And so some of the shit that they would do is they would hold sit-ins, and they also would protest, and they would fuck up bars and like find alcohol and pour it out. At the same time they were trying to get the right to vote. But that wasn't the only thing they were doing. Some of the other shit they were doing is they were spreading the message that black people, were inferior, and also that black men were raping women. That whole narrative. So a lot of black men ended up being accused of shit because of things like this. Not saying solely because of them, but they were spreading that message because they were in direct competition with black people to get the right to vote. You had other black people like Ida B. Wells, who I feel like should be more important within black history movement and other aspects of African American life than she actually is. But Ida B. Wells, she did statistical data and researched into these lynchings and to find out why these black men were lynched, like specifically why this one or that one, And overwhelmingly, the black men who were lynched a lot of time were business owners. Business owners who were in direct competition with other white men during the segregation era. So some of their businesses were so successful, even with oppression, to the point where they just like, oh, we just gotta kill him because he just pushing us out of business. Now you still have the ability to create a business at the same time, even though segregation is something that is prevalent. You still have people in your community that need to buy your stuff. You may have somebody of a different color back then that still might want to buy or use some service that you have. So there were a lot of instances where somebody black was making a lot of money, even though they had to deal with other types of segregation. But when it comes to lynching, sometimes you have certain black people who were lynched because of their success in communities that were in direct competition with white folk. So they didn't give a fuck that you had that business. They cared that you were taking money out their pocket. So it was the profit that made them racist. And so We gotta watch our snap judgments and our preconceived notions about people and why we feel like people do the things they do. Because sometimes it could be somebody doing something nefarious towards you, or not even nefarious, and we all have opinions about people. But sometimes those wrong opinions, they could have consequences. You know, they can have consequences about like what their actual motive is, and then the actions that you take aren't really sufficient to fix the situation for yourself, for your community of people. So it's a big difference trying to stop somebody who's racist because you feel like he just hate black people, and trying to stop somebody who's racist because, you know, some policy that, you know, they lobby about and they put it in communities where statistically it's going to affect you negatively. That happens all the fucking time. But these things aren't looked at as being racist. The things people pay attention to are burning crosses and a facial structure of a person to make you look like somebody who we know about being racist from a hateful manner. But what about those people who are racist through policies that they enact and they push through? The thing about those people is those people aren't really known. It is not really known how they kind of like look within our society. You don't really have a portrait in your head of a person who is racist, not from a hateful standpoint. Well, both of it can be seen hateful, not from a solely hateful standpoint, but from a standpoint of like, I'm going to make it to where I profit off of your suffering. What does that person look like? You know, because sometimes that person is your fucking color. And sometimes they do it and they don't even think about the ramifications of the situation. So if you think about it like that, it's more than just fucking racism. It's more than racism. It's asinine to just look at some shit sometimes and look at some of these things that we argue about and just look at it just racism. Like, maybe if we talk about actual substantive things to where we can change, rather than something that's just like, oh, just the way he think. Well, based off the movies he watch, or like even if a person thinking is hateful, if I take somebody who's hateful, like, why is that person hateful? Could it be because of the way they were taught? You know, could the way they be taught because of things that happen that they've been indoctrinated by? We've had policies throughout the course of American history that have been blatant racist shit, you know? Jim Crow laws, fucking racist, you know? And even you can look at certain things like segregation. Immigration, the Immigration Act. I can take the Immigration Act and the Segregation Act, and you think about what those two things actually did. When it came to segregation, mind you, the thing you have to understand, before segregation, it was a situation where black people, black children, were more educated than certain areas of white children. In certain areas would score higher on IQ tests from black people as opposed to white people during the segregation era. You know, no offense to anybody, but why the fuck would I want to integrate into an area that where the kids score less on the test scores? You know, it doesn't make any fucking sense. You know what I'm saying? In certain areas, you know, everybody can help each other, but these are things that change. You know, it's kind of like, it's almost like a form of socialism. Because we had a certain form of education, and they had a certain form of education. And now we come together and we say, like, we're not going to have both of our forms of education. We're going to have this one form of education that we all agree on. Quotation marks over the all agree on. Because when you are in a community where you're segregated, you have the ability to decide what your kids learn, you know, in schools. More than with another population of people that you want to sign government legislation with to say, like, okay, now our kids can go into your schools. And then we learn the things that you teach your kids and also our kids. You know, and so doesn't anybody see that can be turned into a form of racism? Like long-term racism, systematic racism, to where now Now, where you had in segregated schools and you feel like you had less of whatever and you were struggling, even though we could have gotten by, just like fucking welfare, in the Welfare Act, we could have gotten by with our education, and we would have learned how to teach our kids, exponentially better over the years. It's just like fucking sports and everything else that black people do. They give their own take on it, and they're sufficient at the shit. You educate them to like complete a task or do something, and we can do it. But if you don't educate the people properly, then they don't fucking do it. Nowadays, it's like, it could be thought of as racism the way and IQ levels have gone down, as opposed to like kids in the fucking 30s, who lived in segregated schools, and they were, more intelligent, and they had a certain thought process that kids nowadays don't have. But nowadays, it's not like, oh, this black boy he thinks this way and this white boy thinks this way. They might both think a certain way, but it might be a situation where they're both less educated now. So it's like a form of like education socialism. Instead of one group having a bunch of, knowledge and this group not, or a little less, now both of us have the same amount and it's less than what we both used to have. And it costs a bunch of money to keep going. It makes no sense. No sense. When it comes to the Immigration Act, you think about the Immigration Act and the Segregation Act were kind of like the act to desegregate the schools were passed around the same time, Immigration Act after, like a few years after. I might be wrong with that, but within like fucking 5 years. You know what I'm saying? Less than 5 years, I think. But anyway, 10 years after the Segregation Act was passed, no school had been integrated. So it's like, why waste time? They dragging their feet to implement a system that was going to make us dumber and cost us more money. But anyway, but then at the same time, you have the Immigration Act that brought a lot of people to America. And gave them incentives to come to America. Some of the incentives that some of these immigrants came to America were given were better than the incentives that some Americans, born citizens, were getting. You think about black communities and ghettos that have like fucking drugstores and drug and liquor stores or hair salons, because and owned by like Asian people or somebody of Indian descent, just a foreign person. And just think about some of this shit, like just think about this. The stores in which are put into your neighborhood is dependent on the preference of, whoever is just creating the store, putting the store there, and what they decide that the people want. So you have somebody who could be like Asian descent back in the day. They overwhelmingly opened up more like convenience stores than, black people did, back in the day. And if you think about the things in which they maybe decided to bring over there in these neighborhoods, would it have been a little different if that was started and replaced by black people? Like, what stores would they have put there? Because there's certain things that people just fuck with because it's just part of everyday life and it's just something you just have in communities and neighborhoods. But was that started by us? Was that started by black people? Was it a different way in which we sustained our society and stores and things we had to like make it convenient for people in certain areas when segregation was around? And the answer is yes. But when you desegregate and you make it a situation where you allow them to pass laws that give their businesses the ability to take business from black people, that's racism. That's the thing you need to be thinking about. But at the same time, also passing legislation to allow more immigrants into the country at an exponential rate and give them the ability to start businesses as well, and then put them in your communities. So from one end, you think about like, oh, you want everything to be equal. You want what they have or whatever. That's what it's framed as. Not that you want your own. That's what Malcolm X would talk about, wanting our own. We don't want, I'm not even trying to separate. I'm not trying to talk about it from a separation standpoint. But I'm just talking about it as like, just the context of the situation. You know what I'm saying? I feel like everybody's equal. But just talking about this specific situation, whatever was the best idea to do. And what we did wasn't the best idea to do. It should be a situation where people, if it's something being passed to allow a race of people to like do something, the thing that should be passed is allow them to like start shit in their own companies with certain incentives. Not allow them to just go into your places and spend their money. And now the money that they used to spend in the black-owned establishment is spent in the white establishment. There may be a larger establishment that becomes something just a fucking conglomerate that controls a person's life down the line. But maybe this fucking conglomerate back in the day maybe only became a conglomerate because of the business they were able to snatch up because nobody else was around in certain areas to like become the proper competition to keep that shit from going out of control and them creating a monopoly. And so you have situations to where we trying to integrate and drink out of the same fucking water fountains and eat the same, what you want to drink the same. We feel like that shit is so bad for us that I just need to eat your fried chicken. I just need to eat your sundae. I need to, I understand there were certain things within society that wasn't there, that was an inconvenience to us. I acknowledge that. And I feel like these things also can be something that we create for people in our own community, or could have, if it was an inconvenience. Like, oh, a person got to walk somewhere and had to deal with something. It's like, we can establish some shit, with less, I think about the things in which we pay for right now with the totality of our community past what color or creed a person is, and it costs a bunch of fucking money, and we don't get it's like it's so fucking inefficient. You can have a private person, a person who just like has a bunch of fucking money, and they hire security for a specific area, a specific amount of people, and they can be more efficient with the shit than the fucking government, just because of the red tape and everything else revolve around it and interests from this group and this group, and it creates like a domino effect of fuckery, just to get a skewed end result. And so you think about having an end result to where you feel like that you were so disenfranchised. We are so disenfranchised that we wanted to integrate. And by integrating, they still find a way to get them money and profit and control more than they had beforehand. So now you got welfare. You don't even gotta work. You don't even gotta think about starting a business. Don't even worry about that. Other people will do that. You know what I'm saying? You can't even get a job and be on welfare. So it's like, it's not saying that it's trying to force you to do anything, but it's like, why can't it be just a percentage? Like, I work and you give me a percentage. That'd be cheaper, and people be willing to want to do some shit for themselves. Before the Welfare Act, black people didn't, and poor people, a lot of poor people didn't want fucking welfare like that. They were more prideful, and they didn't care about that shit. You know what I'm saying? The average home that was profitable back in the day had less than what a family on welfare may have nowadays. You can be a family on welfare and have 2 cars in the house. You know what I'm saying? Back in the day, a couple TVs as well. Back in the day, niggas ain't have, some families ain't even have TVs, just maybe running water or whatever. And they still may be like, oh, we good. You know what I'm saying? And then they work and get themselves out of where they at, and they just move up. It's the thing statistically, wherever you start at, in the minority um in the minority society, wherever you start at on a demographic, you're gonna rise to a different level. You know what I'm saying? Depending on what you do and things of that nature. Not saying there's not pitfalls, but the ability for you to get out here and get it was there. And when you have things like welfare, it becomes something that keep people from getting out there and getting it and getting money and thinking about ideas in a specific way to where you make yourself and everybody around you better. If you're trained to just to be complacent with what you're given, your drive to create more within your life and the people around you is nowhere near the same. That shit happens with everything. It's like happened with fucking cats. If you give cats fucking food, and even though they have the ability to hunt, they just gonna want it and just cry for it. It's been situations where they had people, like in national parks, they had people stop feeding bears because they didn't want the bears to become. They didn't want the bears to become like complacent and reliant on people just giving them food scraps. And in certain areas, the bears were so used to the food scraps to the point where when they stopped giving them food scraps, some of them just fucking died to death, starved to death. I mean, it's a bear. He's a bear. He has the ability to create, to like go in the fucking woods and kill something to eat it, but he was so he was so like used to his form of welfare. That food that the person would throw from his picnics on some Yogi Bear shit. So used to that shit. To the point where when he had to fend for himself, he didn't even understand how to do it. He like forgot. They were like fucking killing bears because it's like they just couldn't take care of themselves. It was like a situation they would just like had to weed out the bears who were like dependent on the food. Just think about that from like a you and me standpoint. Like, if that was their welfare, and to get them off the welfare, all they can do is just like get rid of some of them because they couldn't change the way they thought about it. But we have reason and things of that nature. But if the reason isn't being pushed to do things to get you off of it, then why would you try more? You know what I'm saying? So you get welfare. You get welfare, which stops a lot of people from creating their own, and even thinking about creating their own, and even having the thought process a person has that creates their own. And you go into a school and you integrate into a school that provides less critical thinking skills for a child to think and create for their own. And then you have immigration and programs to give immigrants the ability to create businesses, to create businesses before actual citizens can, and then they become the ones who shape your communities, not you. Same thing with the police force. You have a problem with the police force, but you should have had your own fucking police force. You could have. We could have. If it was a problem of actually like a problem like when black people being killed by police officers, you could have had your own police force, But all of these areas integrate and they cause a type of problem that people don't think about. And then and it's like we think about racism. We think about racism and Ku Klux Klan lynchings. Some of the people who were Ku Klux Klan members were politicians. They were Democratic politicians. So then we fight with these people because of this situation. And some of the people at the same time we fighting with are like Ku Klux Klan members and politicians. And and they're friends with other people who are policy writers and lobbyists who then influence people to write laws that disenfranchise us. We allow the party it seems like the party of the people to like pass legislation that it's not racism, it affects everybody. But at the same time, you can't tell me that shit that don't come off as racist. So the next time you think about racism, you need to think about these things. And really like try to, and really just research around this shit, because I mean, it's a lot of shit out there on this. And I feel like that sometimes we look at specific things in a manner in which we really shouldn't. You know, and we look at racism as in just hate why they want to do something. But it's like, okay, before we say that, what else could it be? What if the side who's talking about it is really the ones who's trying to do some fucked up racist adjacent shit? You know, even like with immigration. If I say with Immigration Act, or like immigration now with refugees or whatever, you know what I'm saying? Not saying anybody doesn't like shouldn't be afforded like solitude or whatever, or like sanctuary. But we can help more refugees in the Middle East, and we can help by flying them in fucking planes over here. It's expenses for all that shit. And then you gotta integrate people into societies they don't want to be fucking immigrated in. How long would it take you if you leave where the fuck you was at in America and go to goddamn Afghanistan and like, I'm gonna find me a job and get it popping and learn the learn the customs and the language, and you know what I'm saying? If somebody was trying to set you up to do all that shit and make sure you do it right, it would take a minute. You know what I'm saying? It would not be easy. It's not like a walk in the fucking park. And so we're going to do that for people over here. And then the amount of money we spend to do it for like 10,000, we could have helped 100,000 over there. Like what? Like what? Why? But if I step back and I look at it from like a race, if I say a racist adjacent standpoint, and I look at times in which immigration was like a talking point. So the first time I'm talking about, like, you know, during the Immigration Act and the shit I was talking about with like people coming to this country. Since the Immigration Act, like over 60 million people have immigrated to America. And so 60 million people who immigrated to America need or do something. They create businesses, they take jobs from these businesses, they are on public assistance just like everybody else. And then the more people we have in these areas to do this shit, the more you have to pay for that shit. Sometimes people pulling their weight, but sometimes people ain't pulling their weight. And that goes for citizens and non-citizens. It's a non-citizen right now who making more money than a citizen. So it's like, it's what the fuck ever. It doesn't even matter to me. What matters to me, what doesn't matter to me is people really trying to get ahead. Who start at the bottom. What matters to me is the people who are already ahead, who write things in legislation to allow some of this bullshit to happen, that puts money in other certain people's pocket and give other people more power over our life. And so now you have you on welfare, and then you do this instead of working, and somebody else who not even a citizen of the country may come over here and start a business, and he getting money from you, some of the welfare money that you getting because you don't work while he got a business he can hand down to his fucking his kids or his fucking other family that he subsequently bring over here in occupied neighborhoods or wherever the fuck. And so you do the same thing with refugees, you know. And so with refugees is right now it's less of a situation where they're going to be coming over here and starting fucking jobs. And so if they're not starting fucking jobs, they're going to need fucking jobs from somebody who already established a job over here. And so but there's a lot of people over here who are already citizens ain't got jobs. So one of them ain't going to have a job, or maybe both of them ain't going to have a job. But the person who don't got a job, they're going to be on public assistance. So there's more people that we have to fucking pay for. So then on top of that, you think about illegal immigration, no matter what the fuck people feel about it. Racism. Whatever, man. Whatever. Okay, cool. But what about the other side? Past the hate. What about the fact that if you have people over here who you just allow willy-nilly to come and like use up government resources that go for every fucking thing, you know what I'm saying? Everything. And so government resources from like being locked up to like, oh, now the kids in school and shit, and they have kids while they're here, and then, you know what I'm saying? If you go to fucking Japan and you have a fucking kid, you a kid not Japanese. You just a kid, you just American or German or whoever the fuck you are that had a kid in Japan. And that's how it go for like in Asian countries. But over here you have a kid, now you're a citizen, and now they taking care of you. Not saying that certain people don't need to be taken care of, but if we make it a situation to where it's like we want to accelerate some shit, and it costs us more money, and it's damaging to us as well as them, that's an aspect of it that's never talked about. You know what I'm saying? I can go on and on about this, but that's all I'm gonna tell you about it. But till the next time, No Idea Radio. Peace.